One could not count the moons that shimmer on her roof, or the 1,000 splendid suns that hide behind her walls. This is a passage from a 17th century poem that gave the name to this somewhat heavy book. Not a large book by any means. It's a relatively good-sized book, but heavy in the emotional sense. It is probably one of the hardest books that I ever read. I thought about starting this talk about this book or this review by saying this is the worst book I ever read. But that's not true. A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. This book, number 2, is country number 2, Afghanistan. Because I read The Kite Runner before and I really enjoyed it. I knew he does touch on very sensitive subjects, and it's important to go into that book knowing that. But if you read A Thousand Splendid Suns, you have to be prepared for it. So I'm going to have a lot of spoilers as in my previous review. And of course, in the beginning, I'm going to talk in general, broad sense, what the book is about. And then as we get deeper into this video, then I'll talk more about how the plot happens and what happens to the characters. A very interesting way of writing. Most of the writing happened in Afghanistan, in Kabul and Herat and another small town that I forgot the name now. But it is really well written. You can expect a really good reading. If you read any other of his books, if you already read this book, you can agree or disagree with what I'm going to talk about. But you cannot deny it is a emotionally draining book. I had to stop and give a day or so without reading it because I was getting too emotionally involved, and because it's a heavy book, because it touches in very sensitive and delicate subjects, you need to be prepared, like I already said, going in. So what does this book talk about? First one is a very different culture than what you and I, or at least myself, I'm used to. This book talks about the Afghanistan culture, the way that the partnerships, marriage, relationship with daughters and sons and more than one wives, and how their relationship among themselves is, and how the relationship with the kids of each one of those wives is, and money, of course, and politics. Lots and lots and lots of politics. The book starts with one specific group that dominates that country and ends with a completely different one. And in the middle, there was a third or fourth group that invaded and dominated the country and the city and occupied that area. So they go through those different groups. The writer talks about the ethnic groups that already exist in Afghanistan and the majorities, minorities, and all of that. That in itself, it's already a very delicate subject to talk about, even for this review. I had to think through what I was going to talk about, because how do I present this book? Amazing. From the sense of a book itself, something that touches you deeply, that teaches you about life in a different culture. Yes, this is not a biography. Yes, this is a work of fiction, but what I love about books like this is that it presents a backstory and the city, just like I said on my previous video about a different book. I love when the city or the place or the country works as a character, and in this one it definitely does, because he presents the story through the eyes of two female, which is slightly different from The Kite Runner. This one he presents from the perspective of two female living in first in Herat, one of them, and the other one was born and raised in Kabul. They have different ages, but their relationship with their husband and their relationship with their parents and their relationship with other men in general, their limitations due to the laws and the regulations of the country at that period of time, and how things change from the beginning of the book through the middle of the book to the end of the book politically in the country. But we're going to focus on this review on the two main characters and try to steer away from the politics of it, but you will learn a lot about how during those period of time that happened. You can do a little bit of research and look up the time period, and it does match pretty well with what the writer writes. So he basically got the history of the country and he put two characters, a lot of characters of course, but two main characters in it. So from now on, there will be spoilers, of course. So if you haven't read the book, do it, but go in prepared. You will read about domestic violence, a type of domestic violence that I haven't read in another book. There are books that touches on the subject. The previous book that I read had some mentioning of. This you read as if you were seeing it. He details in grueling terms what is happening, and that can touch you. That can make you feel uneasy or angry or sad or horrified if you're not used to that kind of thing. So that was my long warning of what you expect from this book. So now you go in, there is war added on top of that. Not one, two, or three, or whoever was in power at that time, or whoever was invading at that time. There's a war happening, and there's new customs, and there is new rules that they need to follow. So the story starts with this little girl in a small town in Afghanistan. She lives with her mother, and the beginning is sort of a happy place. She seems to be happy to see her father. Her father is a wealthy man. He travels a lot, and he drives a Mercedes. That was mostly to point out that he was wealthy. However, he doesn't live with them. He comes and visits her mother and her. As the book goes on, you realize that the reason why that happens is they are not married. He is married to somebody else or a few other people, and she is, the main character, is the daughter of these two people that are not married. If you come from certain countries, that could be fine, could be normal, but remember, this is Afghanistan at a certain period of time. So she's called a term that initially for me didn't make much sense, but as you research that term, it's an insult. It's the fact that she was born out of wedlock, and the way that that's treated, she is at the bottom of society, kind of, because her mother made a mistake. Of course, her father did too, but throughout the book you will see this pattern where men get a little bit more of a pass on different things. And life gets a lot more difficult for the main character, one of the main characters, from then on. He promised her that for her birthday, actually she was the one that asked, that she want to go watch a movie in his theater. So he owns a theater, and he had a whole lot of kids. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was 9 kids or something. And she wanted him to invite all of the kids and take her to his theater to watch a movie. She gets dressed up, she waits for him, and surprise, he doesn't show up. That sets off a chain of events that causes the rest of the book to become a horrifying story, a horrifying tale through the next several hundred pages, because she decides that she's going to go to his house and talk to him, because why didn't he show up? So she does. She finds his car and she knocks in the door or in the gate, and a chauffeur comes out, his driver, and tells her that he's not there. You started wondering why. You started thinking, I think he's there, but he just doesn't want to see her. This is his daughter, by the way. And she stays there and she sits there and she waits for him, and she sees him through a curtain. She tells the chauffeur that she's not leaving, that she's going to just sleep there. And they allow her, or they let her sit there and in the streets and just sleep there through the night. She wakes up, somebody brings her food, but in the morning it's time for her to go back home. So she never sees her father. The chauffeur takes her home, but when she gets home, not only a spoiler but also trigger warning, her mother did something really bad to herself. Let's say it that way. And she was a little bit unstable. In the beginning of the book, she does mistreat her daughter a little bit. Her daughter name is Mariam. So Mariam gets mistreated by her mother because her mother calls her name and tells her that she's nothing, that she needs her, and if she ever leaves, that her mother was going to do what she actually did. Now, by herself, because she doesn't have anybody else, her father finally takes her into his house, and he has another 2 wives, if I'm not mistaken. And the wives don't really want Mariam there. So let's skip more, because I'm not going to talk about the entire book. But the fact is that because they didn't want her there, they set her up with a 40, by the way, she's 15 years old at that point. She's set up with a 40-year-old man from Kabul, a town far away from Herat, which is where her father lives. This man was already married. He lost his wife, and now he marries her. He comes in, and through the writing, you can feel that it's not really a marriage. It's a business deal, the way that the writer presents the story. She moves to Kabul with her husband, and from then on, her life is as his wife. She cries a lot. He is kind of rude and mean to her, but at this point, still nothing compared to what's coming. Through the rest of that time, he starts to be more violent against her physically. She has 2 miscarriages. The story now starts splitting into 2. Not as the Shadow of the Wind book that I read last video, that are 2 parallel stories, but these are 2 stories that are happening at the same time, which I guess it is parallel. However, they are intertwined already. So it jumps between one and the other, but they are happening in the same timeline. The second character, that is the main character, is a girl named Laila, and she lives with her mother and her father, and she's in love with this friend of hers, which is a small boy that is missing one leg and uses a prosthetic leg. Her 2 brothers are in a war, and she ended up losing them both. This girl or this girl's father and mother, the father at least wants to leave, and he wants to move to another country and get out of there because things are getting more difficult politically, and the way that whoever is running the country at that time. They don't, and the mother of Laila now, which is the second main character, decides that no, she does not want to leave her place, the place that her sons are buried, and so on. However, they also are gone, both, in an attack. Now this girl is by herself. She's being taken care of in the house of no one other than Mariam and her new husband, or her, not new anymore, but her husband. So he decides that he's going to marry this girl if the girl accepts. This girl is probably around 14, 15. I can't really remember the exact age at the time that all that is happening. And she says yes. The reason that she says yes, you're going to learn later on, but at this point, you start getting entangled in this cultural affair, and that's why I'm deviating a little bit from telling you the entire story. I just want to get to this point because it was important to set the background for the whole story. Now, these two women are married to this older guy, and one of them had two miscarriages, Mariam, and Laila is a very, very young girl. From then on, the book continues with this cultural, political, and domestic. So there's this three layers of learning that you end up knowing about. The cultural side, which is how the marriages are and how the wives and husbands dynamic work, and how the dynamic between the two wives now. Of course, Mariam is the first one, and she doesn't really accept very quickly the new person coming in. But over time, you will learn that she does they become friends. The next point in the story, he starts increasing his violence against both of them. Laila now has a baby. It's a girl. They decided that they want to flee. They want to run away from him because he's being violent against both of them. He has locked them into their rooms or into a shed or whatever, and they are fearing for their lives. They run away, but that's where they encounter again the three layers: the domestic, the political, and the cultural systems. They have to ask a male at the bus stop to buy them a ticket and pretend to be their cousin. He does tell them that he accepts. They pay him, and he turned them in to the authorities. When they go back home, you know what happened. The husband becomes extremely violent, and now is where the depiction of the violence becomes even more crystal clear, because of the way that the writer is telling you that story is basically the point by point. He's helping you create that image. He's helping you visualize what's happening in there. That's the one part that I don't know if I appreciated. And of course, the subject is already sensitive, but that didn't really help. Time progresses and a new regime comes in, an old regime is gone, and the war keeps happening, people dying. And there's parts of the book that you read and the characters will say that it's part of life in there at that time, that everybody had stories of loss. However, as the book progresses through that muddy middle that I talk about sometimes, you start becoming depressed. You as the reader, at least I did, because things don't get better. They just get worse. And I understand, again, just like on the first country in the first book, there needs to be a drama, there's need to be stakes being raised, but this one gets you a little down a little bit. And until you get to a point where the two female had it, and they decide to take some actions. And from then on, I'm not going to talk more about it in specifics because I would be ruining the rest of the book. But up to now, that's how the story goes. How does the book end? Remember, this is happening in a country, and the author is using that country's history as the background. So I can say that it's always a happy ending because things didn't end by the end of the book. Things continue to happen. And is it worth to read it? Definitely. Just make sure, like I said in the beginning, you need to go into this book with the knowledge that is going to be a hard book, that is going to be an intense book for you to read. But you're going to learn a lot about how pieces of history in that country happen. And that's why this A Book from Every Country project that I started, it's so fascinating, because even though I'm learning just a small snippet of a piece of history in a country, because the rest of the culture, the rest of the country is not going to be what you read on a fiction book. And if you read non-fiction book, it's always going to be based on somebody's bias or side. If I read a Western author that writes about Afghanistan, I'm going to read about that author's and that author's country's point of view, most likely. If I read a book written by an author from that country, gives me a little bit better sense, but you also know that there are biases there. So I like the non-fiction that uses the country as a background, because you learn snippets of the culture, snippets of the political system without any opinion. So you're just told how things are in that story, not how they should or should not be. And I'm going to continue reading the next books in the next book. But I am hoping that whichever book I choose next is a little lighter reading. It's a little happier ending. I'm probably going to start looking into the countries of the United Kingdom. And if I do that, I'm not going to read one book for the United Kingdom. I would basically split into England and Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales, and get one book of each, because there's rich and long history there. And usually when we talk about demographics and ethnicity in certain countries, there's a lot of minorities, there's a lot of different groups, and you can learn a lot about when reading these fiction books. So A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. Fascinating reading, just like the last one, but very difficult subject to read about. I do hope you read it. I do hope you like it. And I do hope you come back here and you tell me what you thought about it. Or if you already read it, tell me now what you think about it. Give me suggestions for the next reading. And if you are from one of the countries that I haven't read yet, suggest me a book, something that tells me about the country, something that it's fiction but uses the country and a little snippet of reality into that story. And I'm really hopeful that the more and more I do this, I get to see a little bit of the world through the pages of books. And I'll see you on the next video. Thank you very much for watching this one.